Well, good morning. For those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet in person, my name is Rachel, and I lead the family ministries here at City North. So City North kids, City North students. And for the last several years, it has been the absolute honor of my life to get to share the Sunday morning message on Mother's Day. So I'm grateful to do that again. I am so glad you are here sharing this day with me and with all of us. At City North, we talk a lot about that we use the term spiritual family a lot when we are inviting you to Starting Point, which is the first Sunday of the month, by the way. But when we are inviting you to Starting Point, we say our goal of that is to help you decide if this is the spiritual family for you. And we do that for a lot of reasons, some very intentional reasons. The first one is that we want to communicate that this is a place to be connected and involved, that this is a place where you are going to build family, and you are going to go from being treated like a guest at the dinner table who, yes, you are going to be treated great, and you are going to get the best slice of pie when it comes to dessert time. But you are not going to be there when we're cleaning the dishes, and you're not going to be a part of the inside jokes about the crazy Uno attack game that your family had all those years ago. We want to communicate that our picture of church is not a service with worship, songs, and a sermon. Yes, we do that, and those are important things. But our picture of what the church means is an intertwining of lives of people who are following Jesus, and we're all helping each other look more like Jesus, and we're helping each other make the world look like the way God created it to look. But on a day called Mother's Day, a day that is celebrating a particular role in a family, I am acutely aware that any language, any terms that have to do with family might bring up a lot of different feelings for a lot of us. Some of us have family experiences where we did wash the dishes together every night and we played crazy Uno attack games, and we have memories that we laugh about year after year. I think for most of us, anything having to do with family is wrapped up in both the heartbreaking and the heart-building. I think family is just a lot of imperfect people living in a kind of close space, bumping into each other. And sometimes that's life-giving and sometimes that's life-taking. And our feelings about family are both and. And for some of us, we don't even have feelings of family that reach that. We maybe didn't grow up with our biological family, or maybe we did grow up with our biological family, but it was really painful and we kind of wish we weren't related to them. For some of us, we might be here today and we had this vision in our minds of what our family would look like when we were adults. When we reached adulthood, we thought, this is what my family will look like, and maybe it doesn't look like that today. And that can be a really heartbreaking thing. And so just using family language can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so that is why I think it is so important for us to know, what does the Bible say about family? What does the Bible actually show us a picture of throughout the whole of Scripture? So that's what we're going to do today. We are going to walk through the Bible, and we are going to try to develop what I am calling a theology of family. That just makes it sound really fancy, but essentially we are going to try to see if we can build the picture of what God's desire and design for family is. So we are going to start in the beginning in Genesis chapter 1. That is the first book of the Bible. It is the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. At the very beginning, God created mankind. And first he created a man called Adam, and he put Adam in a garden, and then he brought all the animals that he had created to Adam, and he asked Adam to name them. And then he realized, Adam doesn't really have a partner in this thing. Adam doesn't have someone to help him do this work I have given him. And so God created Eve. And when he created Eve and had them together, he created the first family. And these were the instructions he gave to them. Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. So this is the first picture of family in the Bible, the first two humans that God created, and he brought them together to do work together. And what does this picture tell us? Well, the first thing I think it tells us is God explicitly says, it is not good for a man to be alone. And God had just created everything. He had created the earth and the sky and the sun and the moon and the water and all the animals and the plants. And he's still looking around. And then he created humans, and he's still looking around. and realizing this human doesn't have a partner, and that's not good. It's not good for him to be alone. And one of the things that tells us is that, like, the God of the Bible is highly relational. There is this understanding of God called the Trinity, which is just this explanation that, like, God, the capital G God, is actually God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit, all at the same time and for all time. Like, forever they have existed like that. And even when you read Genesis, the beginning when God says, let us create mankind in our own image, he's using the plural form. He's saying, let us create mankind in our own image. So God has existed in relationship for all time. He has never been alone. And so when he created mankind, he was like, oh, this isn't good. This isn't good for him to be alone. Adam needs a peer. He needs someone to help him carry the load. And so he made Eve, but essentially he created family. God's intention for his creation has never been loneliness. It has always been connection. And the second thing that we see in this, like, first family is God's desire for healthy growth. So God had given Adam and Eve a job to do, fill the earth and subdue it. And that term subdue is not as much like ruling with an iron fist and like crushing everything in your path like you might think. We have to remember, God created a garden. God put Adam and Eve in a garden. And we've talked a lot about gardening here, apparently, recently. Andrew's very obsessed, so we're going to just continue that train. What happens to a garden when you don't subdue it? What happens to a garden when you don't calm the chaos? It gets out of hand. The weeds take over. Critters start viewing this as their playground. And eventually, the garden is going to stop producing anything productive. And so God created this earth, and he put Adam and Eve in it to help cultivate it and to continue helping the earth look the way that he built it to look. And yes, he does tell Adam and Eve to multiply. Just to be super clear, yes, that means have sex and have children. Like, we don't need to be vague about it. But part of the reason that he says that is because he knows this garden is going to continue to grow. And he's like, I don't want anyone to be alone in the work of this. Grow your family so that we can together cultivate this earth and help it. So what do we see in the first family that God created? I think we see two things. We see that God created humans to live in connection and to help the earth flourish. Those are the two things that we see. So, spoiler, this is going to be a theme. We're going to come back to it. But first, we're going to jump forward to Genesis 12. So just a little bit forward in that same book, but this is many generations removed from Adam and Eve, and the family of humankind has grown. There are now tons of families. There are clans. There's this, like, delineation between the families now. And God is, like, interacting with his humans, but humans kind of didn't listen to God when he was like, hey, here's the best way to live in this thing that I created, this earth that I created, here's how you should live in it. Humans were like, nah, we know better. So God is still interacting with his creation, but he isn't walking closely with them like he did in the Garden of Eden because sin has entered the world. And so what God decides he's going to do is he's going to call out one family. He's going to call out one family to be his representative to the rest of the world and say, hey, I chose you special, and you're going to represent me. And so he called out the family of Abraham. And he tells Abraham, who at the time was married but didn't have children, to go to a new land. And this is what he tells Abraham is going to happen. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So here we see God is working again on the earth, and he is working through a family, one particular group of people that are related by blood. He is calling them to do something. And God is saying he wants to make this family into a great nation. Like, I want to increase this thing. I want to make this thing bigger. But he doesn't stop there. He doesn't just say, I want to make you into a great nation. He actually says something that I think we forget often when we talk about Abraham and his call from God. He says, I want all peoples on earth will be blessed by you. God is calling out one family, but he was never calling out one family because of favoritism. It was never because Abraham's family was special and they did something right and everyone else did something wrong and God didn't care about the other people in the world. God was calling forth one group of people who happened to be related by blood to represent him, to be a blessing to the rest of the world, essentially to help the rest of the world flourish. We see those two things over and over: live in connection and help the earth flourish. That is the design that God has created humans with, and we just keep living out that design in different ways in different generations. And so far, up to this point in human history, we have basically been living out that design of live in connection and help the earth flourish through family, through people who are blood related. And that was done through physical procreation. That is how families grew. And we see that Abraham, he is looking forward at his physical descendants, and they are going to be blessings to the world. But as I said, Abraham doesn't have a son. At the point that God says this, Abraham does not have any children, and they go years and years without having children. And we're not going to get too deep into it today, but things get a little wild when Abraham and his wife Sarah decide they need Abraham to have a son, but they think Sarah can't have children, and things get a little wild. You can read about that in Genesis. But that is how important having physical children was in the ancient world. And we have talked about this a little bit before, especially with Ruth and Naomi when we did the book of Ruth. Having physical children was so important because if your family was small, if you didn't have children in the next generation, there were less people to take care of you. It was a greater likelihood that you were going to die an early death, to be frank, if you didn't have a large family to take care of you. But there is something else significant about having children in the nation of Israel that I didn't realize. I didn't realize the significance of it until recently. God literally told Abraham, hey, I'm going to bless your family, make them a nation, and then they're going to bless the world. This is the covenant we are making, which means all of the women who were in the nation of Israel viewed that as their responsibility to build the nation of Israel. That is how you spread the word of God, was building the nation of Israel bigger and expanding the nation of Israel and inviting everyone into that. And that was how you helped the world flourish. You helped the nation of Israel flourish by giving it more sons and daughters who followed God, and we grew bigger and bigger, and that's how we blessed the world. And so if you especially were a woman, but in general, if your family didn't have children, there was a double shame to that in ancient Israel. You didn't have as many people to take care of you, and so that was a scary proposition, but you also felt like you were letting God and your nation, your family, down. So either, if you were a person who couldn't have children, you either felt like a total failure, or you felt like God doesn't want my descendants in the nation of Israel, so he is preventing my family from having children. It was a very heavy, weighty, shameful thing to not have children. And that is why we have stories of women like Hannah in the Old Testament who didn't have a child and wanted a child so badly that she essentially stopped eating, and they traveled to Jerusalem, and she threw herself in front of the doors of the temple, and she was praying so hard and from such a place of brokenness and desperation, that the high priest came out and straight up just thought she was drunk. She was so out of her mind and body, wanting a child and praying for a child so badly that the high priest just thought she was drunk and was going to tell her to go away and get out of the doors of the temple. That is the situation in ancient Israel. That is how important it was to have children. And part of that is just us living out this thing that God built in us to live in connection and help the earth flourish. That was how we saw it happening. We saw it happening through physical procreation, through families growing. But then we get to the book of Isaiah, and that is several books forward in your Old Testament, and that is generations and generations after Abraham was given this promise from God. And the people of Israel did reach that pinnacle. They did become a nation. They had their own king. They had their own land. They reached this promise that God had given them. And they stayed there for approximately a half a generation. It did not last very long because even when they became this great nation, when they reached that pinnacle, the people forgot how God had asked them to live. He forgot how God had told them, hey, you are supposed to be, I have blessed you so you can be a blessing to the rest of the world. You're not just supposed to be a blessing to yourselves. And slowly you see families start to fall apart. The royal family starts like infighting about who's going to be in charge. And eventually the nation just collapses. They keep getting like conquered by whatever new other nation is the biggest in the area. People are getting taken away from their homeland and in exile. Like everything that God had promised, it seemed like it was gone, like it disappeared and it was not coming back. And during that time, God sent prophets into the kingdom to tell the people, hey, I know this is really bad. This is what God is saying to you through this. And Isaiah was one of those prophets. And so we read in chapter 54, in the midst of like this absolute chaos and pain, this is one of the messages Isaiah has from God to the people of Israel. He says, sing, barren woman, you who never bore a child. Burst into song, shout for joy, you who were never in labor. Enlarge the place of your tent. Stretch your tent curtains wide. Do not hold back. Lengthen the cords and strengthen the stakes, for you will spread out to the right and to the left. Do not be afraid. You will not be put to shame. Do not fear disgrace. You will not be humiliated. You will forget the shame of your youth, and you will remember no more the reproach of your widowhood. So that's a different picture of family than what we've seen so far. That is a completely different picture. We just got done talking about like barren women. There was little that was more shameful in the ancient world. And here is God in the midst of this like chaos and turmoil telling barren women that they should rejoice, that they should sing songs of joy. And not only that, he doesn't just say, hey, rejoice, like feel better about your situation. He literally instructs them to make their houses bigger. That's what build a bigger tent means. Make your houses bigger for all the children you will have, and all of your shame is going to be gone. Like that's an entirely different picture of family than what we have seen so far. And it gets even crazier just 2 chapters later in chapter 56. Now, I'm going to have to set the stage for this, and I'm going to have to be a little explicit in my explanation because it talks about some poetry, but it also talks about words that we don't use very often. But if we don't understand who God is talking to and what they're saying to him, we do not understand the beauty of what God says here. So in chapter 56, God addresses the eunuchs. So I'm going to explain what a eunuch is. A eunuch is a man who has had his testicles removed. So he can no longer have children. So sometimes that happened intentionally, especially if there was a man who was a servant of like a princess or an important woman. They would castrate them because it just lessened the chance of any funny business. But you could also become a eunuch by just disease or by an accident happening. But this is important because being a eunuch is the same type of shame as being a barren woman. Like you couldn't have children. You couldn't contribute to the household of Israel. You weren't going to have a lineage. Your family name was going to end with you. And so in chapter 54, God is speaking to women who feel shame about this concept of family. He is speaking to barren women. In chapter 56, he speaks to barren men. He speaks to men who feel shame about this concept of family. And this is what he says. To the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant, to them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name, better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will endure forever. So God is speaking to men who can no longer have a family in the traditional way. Again, their name is not going to be passed down to the next generation. They are not going to be a part of any lineage, either their own lineage or God's lineage. Like it stops with them. And God looks at them and says, I'm going to build you a statue in my house. I'm going to build you a memorial. I have to be a little explicit again. The term here that is used for memorial is also sometimes the word used for penis. So in case you thought God was being vague, he is not. He is being real direct in speaking to the shame of these men and saying, hey, this thing that you're ashamed of, I'm going to build a statue to it. and that statue is going to give you a better name than either sons and daughters. And like, there is nothing in the ancient world that is more important than racking up physical sons and daughters. Like, it barely exists. Like, not even money was as important really in the ancient world. And God is looking at these men who feel shame about this concept of family and who are barren and who just like don't get to participate in this thing that a lot of humankind does. And he's saying, it's all right, I got you. I'm gonna give you something better. Like, that is just a completely different picture of family. But what's interesting is it's still about connection. It's still about relationships. It's still about kinship, but it's not about biological family. And to be totally honest, that picture in Isaiah of family that is so different than what happened, in the times before that, it's also very different than our picture of family in America today. Even if we don't want to admit it, if you grew up in America in any time of the last 100 years, which if you're in this room, I assume that is you, we have been told the story that an ideal family is one mom, one dad, and 2.5 kids. For some reason, there's a half kid thrown in there. But in sociology, they call that the nuclear family. And for most of us, like I said, if you grew up in the United States, when the word family was said, that is the picture that is in your mind. A mom, a dad, a handful of kids, small handful of kids, in a house that hopefully you own, and you're like eating dinner around the table every single night. And we have been taught that that is what family is. But you know what's interesting? That concept, the nuclear family, did not exist in human history before the year 1900. It didn't exist. For the entire rest of human history, including in the Bible, family meant something very different. People did not live in like isolated units of just these small groups of people. They lived in extended clans. So there are multiple family units who are related by blood, but they also were usually brought together by like a common purpose, usually a business. Like, this is the family farm. We all work the family farm. And that meant there was this high level of connection because not only did you see each other a lot, you were like working together on a thing. You had to communicate well. You had to see each other. And the other thing that was really like not just important, like it just was what it was. Like there weren't families that weren't like this. Multiple generations were living together. Grandparents were living with their grandkids. At that point in human history before 1900, I think over 75% of families had grandparents living with their grandkids in the same house. That was just normal. That like wasn't special. That wasn't like because grandparents like needed it. It's just what it was. That's how all families looked. But then if you are a history buff, you know what happened around 1900, that early 20th century, we had the Industrial Revolution. And that is when essentially we started making goods in factories. Instead of having these like specialized family businesses, the Industrial Revolution happened and people could go work in other jobs. And here's the reality. Extended families are very good in a lot of ways. They're very resilient. They are very good and calm at change. If you had a kid that was sick, you didn't have to call a babysitter or not go to do your job that day. An auntie just like came and sat with them and it was fine. Like the wheels did not grind to a halt because a kid was sick. If like a father and son had a relational break, there were other people around to step into that relationship and that family and cover those roles. But there are drawbacks to extended families. There's not a lot of freedom and there's not a lot of autonomy. That's just the reality. Like, you were probably going to work in whatever your family business was, and you, even if you were like, I don't love sweeping up manure, like, if your family's business was a farm, you were gonna sweep up manure. Like, that's just what it was. And so there was not a lot of individual choice in that. And so when the Industrial Revolution happened and factories existed, all these kids were like, oh, I can like leave my family and go somewhere else and make enough money to like survive. Oh, like can I go do that? Like, I'm gonna go do that. So they did. A bunch of kids left their family businesses and moved away from their extended families to go work in these factories. Now, they still got married, they still had kids, but they were doing it far away from their extended families. And this new type of family formed where it was like two adults that agreed to get married and started a family, but far away from their families of origin. And that is the start of the nuclear family. It did not exist before that. But it became, by 1960, it was the main way families looked. Over 75% of all children were living with two parents and apart from their extended family. That's just what family looked like. But that that changed in less than 100 years. The entire way that humans lived together in 100 years was completely changed. So if you're like me, two parents and their kids living far away from extended family, like that sounds normal. That doesn't sound weird. And for some of us, it might even sound like the ideal. But the reality is this change in the way families live is a little less shiny than we want to believe. Moving away from extended clans has given us more mobility and freedom and autonomy, but it has left us with other voids. Americans today have less family than ever before. Fewer relatives are around in times of stress to help a couple work through them. If there's something that goes wrong, whatever grown-ups are in that household, they're figuring out, and they're figuring it out on their own, and there's no one else to help them. By 1960, 13% of all households were single-person households, like one person living in a dwelling. By 2018, that figure is up to 28%, and I think actually today it is close to 30%. 30% of all dwellings in America are one person living on their own. That's not a bad thing. It's just a change. And it actually has led to, there is a housing crisis now. There is an actual housing crisis that there are not enough dwellings in America for the number of people who want to live in a house alone. In 1850, 75% of Americans who are older than 65, so I'm just going to say grandparents, and not all of them are probably grandparents, but grandparents because that's easier. 75% of grandparents were living with relatives. By 1990, like 100 years later, only 18% of grandparents are living with any family. That is a wild change. The physical space separating our individual families has gotten wider too. Our houses are bigger, our yards are bigger. Our yards often have fences now for a lot of good reasons. A lot of us have dogs that we would like to not run away. A lot of us have children we would like to not run into the street. Fences are good. But we have bigger houses, bigger yards, fences. We also have this thing called air conditioning, which is lovely, and I love it. However, you know what it means? We don't sit on our porches anymore. We don't sit on our porches having front porch conversations with our neighbors. I don't even know all of my neighbors, and I live in a townhome, so my neighbors are literally sharing walls with me, and I don't even know all of them. There has been studies that show married people are less likely to visit their parents and siblings, and even when they do visit, they're all basically guests. They're not helping each other with chores. They are not offering emotional support. They are essentially sort of friends. And there's this code of family self-sufficiency that prevails. Mom, dad, and the kids, you're on your own. Figure it out. It's your life. Figure it out. And without extended families, some of the people who have been affected the most are the oldest generation, our grandparents. 35%, this one's interesting to me, 35% of Americans who are over 50, who are over 45. So we're not talking retired age yet. These people still working. That percent, 35% of Americans over 45 say they are chronically lonely. Now, and that's not even talking about people who are retired and don't have a job to go to and see other humans. And many older people are now elder orphans. They have no close relations who live close to them as their bodies are beginning to fail them. And we don't know what we're going to do about it. As a society, nobody knows. The government does not know. And you know what is crazier as you start to pick apart these threads of the nuclear family? The picture that a lot of us Americans have in our minds of a mom and dad and two kids, the reason we have that picture in our minds is because of marketing campaigns from the 1950s, and they were marketing campaigns for toasters. Because whoever invented the toaster at one point was I want every two Americans, adult Americans, to own a toaster. How can we do that? Oh, we'll just say that every family needs a toaster, and we will make a picture of a family be two adults. So the reason we have this picture in our mind is for toasters. So I love my toaster, but like that's not enough reason for us to completely redefine the definition of family. We have this picture in our minds, and it is not based on anything real. That is based on a marketing campaign. And these changes has left us with an actual health crisis. Almost exactly 1 year ago, May 2023, the American Surgeon General came out and has officially declared loneliness as a public health threat and an epidemic in America. And they have said that lacking connection can increase the risk for premature deaths to the levels comparable to smoking daily. So we are literally dying faster because we are lonely in this country. So a lot of the information I just shared is from an article in The Atlantic by David Brooks titled "The Nuclear Family Was a Mistake." And I gotta say, after reading it, he makes some really compelling points about the nuclear family being a mistake. But the article goes on to talk about how people have started to feel this lack. They've been feeling this lack for the past 30 or 40 years. And people have come up with a new way to combat it, and we're just now giving it a name, and it's called found family or forged family. You may have heard the term found family, but essentially, a lot of adults who are living far away from their biological family just look at each other and are like, hey, do you all want to be family with me? And they build up that family and that level of connection with other adults that they choose. Because, again, God created us to live in connection to help the earth flourish. This is built into us. We can't survive without it. And so there's this new form of family happening in America and across some other developed countries called found family, because people are just like, I can't do this on my own. And as the Bible began, we see the picture of family began to change in the Bible. Going from, hey, this is a family that's going to reproduce and they're going to build children and flourish. And then we see God saying to people who can't reproduce, hey, you have an important role in my family. The other person in the Bible who completely repainted the image of family is Jesus. In the first chapter of John, one of the books that tells the story of Jesus' life, John is describing Jesus as the light of the world, and he starts using this family language all of a sudden, and he says, to those who believed in his name, in Jesus' name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent or of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. Here at the very beginning of the story of the Messiah, God's promised Savior coming into the world, we see a picture of family that explicitly says it is not about sex and procreation, it is not about biology, it's not about blood. There are a couple of times that Jesus says some really harsh things about families. At one point, he tells a guy who needs to bury his dad that he should let the dead bury their own dead, and he should go follow Jesus. And there's another time he says, if anyone comes after me, quote, and does not hate father, mother, wife, and children, brother and sisters, such a person cannot be my disciple. Now, I don't think Jesus just hated family. He created family. I don't think he just hated it. But I do think Jesus is very aware that God placed in us this need for connection, and that it is really easy for us to make idols out of one kind of connection over another. It is really easy for us to prioritize a certain connection, a certain picture of family at the expense of every other picture of connection and family, including connection with God. So, how do we fight this? How do we fight a culture that has gone completely in a different direction than the rest of human history, and we're just now figuring out the problem? How can we deal with the loneliness and overwhelm in our own lives? A lot of people have dealt with that by building found families. But here's the good news. If you are a follower of Jesus, you don't have to build a new family. You don't have to build a found family. You've already been gifted a family. You have one. It is the family of God. That is what John just said. We are born again. When we follow Jesus, we are born again into the family of God. It is already yours. You don't have to build something new. You don't have to go find other people. This is gifted to you already. So what does that practically mean for our lives? It is lovely for me to stand here and say, you've already been gifted a family. And then some of you will go home to a Mother's Day that maybe doesn't look like how you wanted. And you'll be like, well, what good does that do me? But I think the first thing that knowing we have already been gifted this family is one, we are released from the pressure of building family in any ways that the world tells us or other people tell us. We are free from the pressure of having to build families in a certain way. We have already seen God speaking to barren women and eunuchs and saying, hey, you're important in my kingdom. You get statues. It doesn't matter that you can't have children. You get statues. And even when God was talking about marriage, or even when Jesus was talking about marriage and divorce, he talks about eunuchs again, and he says, hey, it is better to be a eunuch for the gospel, to not be married and to not have kids, than to be married and have kids. Like that's explicitly what Jesus says. And Jesus, the founder of our faith, and Paul, the guy who wrote most of the New Testament, were both single. So I'm going to just say this very clearly if no one has ever said it to you. If you are in the room and you are single, you are no less important to the connection and flourishing of anyone else in the spiritual family. People without biological children in the room, you are no less important to the connection and flourishing than anyone else in the spiritual family. Students, you are no less important to connection and flourishing in the spiritual family just because you're young. You do not have less to offer. You are not second-class citizens. You are essential. You are needed in the spiritual family no matter what your home life looks like. So the other thing I think, remembering that the spiritual family is already ours, it's already been gifted to us, is that we are a part of a spiritual lineage that goes back thousands of years, and depending on when Jesus decides to come back, goes forward ahead of us years and years. Hebrews has this beautiful section where it talks about the greats of the faith, and it has this picture of like your life is a marathon that you are running, and the greats of the faith are standing alongside the marathon, and they are cheering you on. And my husband ran a marathon a couple weeks ago. I know Jason ran a marathon a couple weeks ago. There are several of you in the room who have run marathons, half marathons, just in general races. God bless you. But I have 3 times gone to a half marathon and been in the crowd. And every time it is an emotional experience for me. And a little bit because, like, you know, this person that I love is doing this hard thing and I'm proud of him. But also because there are a few moments in our lives where we just get to unabashedly cheer for people. We just get to like be as weird as we want, have cowbells, have a mermaid balloon, yell their names. We get to yell to make sure they see us, and we make sure, like, we run in the crowd. I don't know how many blocks we're like running, fast walking to try to see them at mile marker 4 and mile marker 10. There are just not a lot of moments where we just get to unabashedly cheer for people. Even if it's not someone we love or know, we just get to cheer. And like that is the picture of Hebrews, that there is the spiritual lineage of people standing alongside our lives, just cheering their guts out for us. And for those of us in the room who are parents, you have continued that lineage by having kids, and you know what it's like to cheer on your kids. And that is great, and I want to, like, the parents in the room, you all work so hard and you're so tired, and I am so proud of you. So many times I am so proud of you. But for those of us who are in the room who don't have biological children, we have a choice. We have a choice of if we are going to help continue that lineage, that legacy, or are we not? Are we going to invest in the next generation and be spiritual mothers and fathers to the next generation and be cheering them on and be a part of that cheering section for other people's lives, or are we not? Because the reality is not everyone gets to get married. Not everybody gets to have kids. But everyone has a choice of whether or not they are participating in the spiritual lineage of the spiritual family. So how do we do this? Like, what are our next steps? How do we invest? How do we do this thing of spiritual family? The first suggestion I have is to expand your family. Expand your definition of family. If you are used to thinking about your family being you and a spouse and your 2 kids, here's the reality. You are slowly suffocating yourself. If you are a single person and you are waiting for your spouse, or you're waiting for that future family that you have in your brain, you are slowly suffocating yourself. And this is where I think it's really easy for us to assume everyone whose like life looks different than us has it easier. But here are 3 things I have heard people at every single life stage in our spiritual family say. I still want to be invited. I'm so tired. I feel so alone. Whether you're single, married, have kids, don't have kids, I have heard all of you say something like that. So like, let's just like talk to each other about it. It's fine. Like, it's fine. We can just talk to each other. Our lives don't have to look the same for us to be family. And sometimes our lives looking different actually makes it easier. Parents, how many of you in the room have ever felt tired of being the bad guy and felt like you couldn't have one more corrective conversation with your kid without absolutely losing your mind? I know, woohoo! You know what you want to do? Tag in someone else. Maybe tag in someone who isn't a parent and doesn't have to have corrective conversations every day, but someone your kids loves and trusts, tag them in and say, hey, go yell at my kid about their homework. Hey, my kid and I are having a real hard time with this. Can you go talk to them? I have done that for some of the parents in the room. I have done that to some of the students in the room. And it's because I love you. It's because I love you students. I love you parents. Your jobs are hard. I don't have to have your same job to be able to help you. And in fact, there are ways I can help you because I don't have your same job. And that is true for all life stages. So generally, I think we would just like benefit from not assuming what anyone else wants to do or how anyone else feels about their lives. But I think we can build up this thing where we expand our definition of family. It doesn't have to look the way the world says. It doesn't have to look like the picture we've been fed since we were 5. It doesn't have to. We can expand our definition of family. The other thing that I think we need to do is we need to invest in our family. Being a part of the family means participating in the activities of the family. The dish cleaning, the Uno games, the family meetings, the softball games, the work, the play, the good and the bad. Otherwise, you're just a guest. And guests are great, but you're not part of the family. So we need to invest in our family. One thing we need to do is invite people in. And I don't mean just like go to dinner once every 3 months when your schedules magically align because we're adults and schedules are dumb. Like, that's great. Go to dinner. You should do that. But you know what else you should do? You should let people into your house. You should let people into your mess. You should let people see behind the curtain of your life. And we're all busy. I know this. It doesn't have to be a bunch of extra time. Do all of us go grocery shopping? Cool, go grocery shopping together. Do all of us run errands? Cool, go run errands together. Do some of us have pantries that maybe need to be cleaned out? Cool, maybe some of us will like come over and clean out your pantry. Has that happened to some of us in the room? Yes, it has. Did we clean out a pantry together? Yes. But you know what else we did? We built connection. We built relationship. Invite people in. And invite people into like your big next steps. Married people, when is the last time you talked to a single person about what it's like to date in the year 2024? Have you just like decided, well, I don't have to talk to them about that because I don't know their life anymore. Well, maybe you could just ask. Like maybe just ask, like, hey, are you dating? What is it like to date in 2024? Tell me all the things because I haven't dated in a while. I haven't dated in a while and I am not that much older. Just ask. Just invite people into the behind the curtains of your life. Invite people into whatever the next big step for them is. Whatever is going to be the next step for someone else flourishing, we can help them get there. Invite them. At City North, we have a lot of ways to help you invest in your spiritual family. Small groups that help you meet new people and have deeper connections. Serving on teams to build relationships with fellow family members as you build up City North together. Investing in the next generation through City North Kids or City North students. We don't offer these things because we want you to be busier. We offer them because we want you to live in connection and help the earth flourish. So 2 questions I want you to ask this week. They're not on your paper, but you all can write them down. Who do I need to invite in? Who do I need to invite in? 2, who do I need to invest in? So as we are getting ready to celebrate Mother's Day, I just cannot get past this picture of people that are cheering us on. And for a lot of us, the first people who ever cheered us on was our mom. So like to the moms in the room, thank you for unwaveringly cheering on the people that you love, because sometimes it is heartbreaking and sometimes it is exhausting. But to all the other women in the room too, thank you for being spiritual mothers. Thank you for cheering us on. Thank you of being a part of a lineage that allowed me to be here on this stage, that allows City North to exist, because we would not have gotten here without all of the women in the room. So I'm going to thank God for you today, and I'm going to pray that he will help us figure out how to do this thing of spiritual family. Let's pray. God, I am just so grateful. I am grateful for my mom. I am grateful for my grandma. I am grateful for my mama and the women who not only brought me into existence, but brought me into faith with you and brought me here to this time and place to serve you in this area. And God, for all of the moms today and for all of the women who are spiritual leaders, we are grateful. And we pray that you strengthen them today and you comfort and encourage them today. And for our entire spiritual family, God, will you remind us that we never have to do this alone? Your creation was never intended for loneliness. You did not build that in. That is a part of the fall, and that is a consequence of sin, and you have given us another way, God. So will you just remind us as we go forward that we already have a family and we are already home. In Jesus' name, amen.